Hi, my name is Kaylee and I'm with Youth Code Jam, and this is the first video in our Cybersecurity Escape Room series. So today we'll be talking about who is trustworthy online. People online may not always be what they seem. Just like in real life, we often think about stranger danger. Our parents or guardians may have talked to us about being cautious around people that we don't know because we don't really know what their intentions are. This applies to the internet as well, not just the physical world. So not everyone has our best interests in mind, and it's up to us to protect ourselves and to be really aware of who we're talking to and what they might want. So we meet people everywhere on the internet. There's so much that's online now. You guys might have social media that's got things that you can post or direct messaging capabilities. There are also online games where you can collaborate with people in your area or even around the world. There are forums where you can talk about different topics on like Quora or Reddit, depending on what your parents or guardians have given you access to. So much of the world is online, and there are so many people out there to meet. I'm sure you could brainstorm a couple more places where you might meet people on the internet. So now let's get into some telltale signs of someone who's not trustworthy online. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. These are just some starting points to get you thinking about some really starting point red flags for, hey, if I notice these things about someone that maybe they're not the most trustworthy, maybe I need to be a little bit more careful. So someone who's not trustworthy online might ask you for personal information, like your last name, your phone number, or your address. Most people don't need to know those things about you. And it's important to keep your private information private. So someone who's not trustworthy might ask you for pictures or want to send you pictures. Generally, it's not a good idea to exchange pictures unless you know the person outside of that internet context, but best judgment and maybe even just like asking an adult for some help or guidelines might be a good thing here. Someone who's not trustworthy might want to meet up with you in real life, even if you've never met them before, or they might just make you feel uncomfortable. And this is a big one because there may not be anything that you can point to and say that like this feels wrong or this feels weird. But if someone makes you feel uncomfortable, you should listen to that feeling. That gut feeling is important. And yeah, it's okay. You don't need to have a set reason in order to feel uncomfortable. If you feel uncomfortable, that's how you feel. And I'm sure that you can think of some other telltale signs based on your experience or the experiences of others that you know about people who are not trustworthy online. If you're not sure if someone that you're talking to or communicating with is trustworthy, a parent or a guardian can help you clarify what some good boundaries are and help talk through like some of the people that you've met if you're not sure. So what should you do if you experience a situation where you meet someone who's not trustworthy and you're kind of already stuck in that? Well, first and foremost, you should understand that this is not your fault. People target minors especially, which means just kids under 18, who tend to be more vulnerable than maybe some adults who are more experienced with interacting online. So understand that this is not your fault, that it is the fault of whoever is maybe intending to harm you or to steal your information from you. But what does matter, what is important, is what you do going forward. So we recommend that you would stop contact with that person as soon as you kind of figure out in your head that, hey, this may not be the safest interaction. And maybe you should warn other friends you have who might be in contact with that person also. So maybe you all play a game together online, or you're all part of a certain Quora thread, and you realize that, hey, I shouldn't be interacting with this person anymore. You should also let your friends know. Then the next bullet that I have is that you should let an adult know. Adults can often be better able to handle some of these situations, maybe just because like they have more just life experience generally, more knowledge about like the legal system or about what can be done to protect you. like it's in their best interest to protect you. And so you should never be afraid to let the trustworthy adult in your life know if you do experience something like this. And so we're going to do a puzzle related to this idea about people who are trustworthy online. And it's called, I'm calling it a hackers and heroes puzzle. And this may look a little familiar if you were here for our Puzzle Club series a couple of weeks back. But here's how this is going to work. You will be given statements from each person who you meet in an online chat room or game forum or wherever. And there are only two kinds of people. So heroes always tell the truth and hackers always lie. If the person you meet is a hero, their statement will be true. If the person is a hacker, then that means that they can only lie and their statement will be a lie. And it's your job to figure out who is telling the truth, which means they're a hero, and who is lying, which means they're a hacker. And we're going to go through some examples together. And so here are some strategies for solving a hackers and heroes puzzle. You should look at all of the possible scenarios and eliminate the ones that aren't possible, to put it simply. This will make a little bit more sense as we go through it as a group. So let's look at our first example. There are only two kinds of people on this website, hackers and heroes. Hackers always lie and heroes always tell the truth. And so you meet two people named Liv and Mick. Liv says, Mick and I are both lying. Mick says, I am a hero. And it's our job to determine if Liv is a hacker or a hero and if Mick is a hacker or a hero. So the first step to solving this puzzle is to pull out the statements or the things that each person says. So first, Liv says, Mick and I are both lying. That's her statement. And Mick's statement is that I am a hero. Mick is a hero. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to make an assumption or a best guess about one of these people being either a hacker or a hero. And we're going to try to work through the problem and see if everything makes sense based on that assumption. So I'm going to assume that Liv is a hero, that she tells the truth. That would mean that if she's a hero and always tells the truth, that her statement up here must be the truth. And so Liv tells the truth, and her statement, Mick and I are both lying, must be the truth. Which is a bit confusing when she says that she is lying, which is what she says in this last part here. So if Liv tells the truth about herself lying, then she must be lying. But she only tells the truth. And if you notice, we get into this kind of spaghetti mess of, hey, this really doesn't make sense. And so that can be our clue that maybe my assumption was wrong. If stuff seems contradictory, the contradiction is the official word for the spaghetti mess, as I call it. So let's try to change our assumption and rework this puzzle. So instead of assuming that Liv is a hero, that she tells the truth, I'm going to now assume that Liv is a hacker, that she tells lies. So if Liv only tells lies, then her statement up here must be a lie, which means the opposite is going to be true. And so what's the opposite of Mick and I are both lying? Well, the opposite would be that at least one of them is telling the truth, right? Because they're not both lying. So one of them's got to be telling the truth at least. And so if either Mick or Liv have to be telling the truth, and we know that Liv lies, then Mick must be telling the truth. And so from this, we can derive that then Mick is a hero, that Mick tells the truth. And so now we're going to check our assumptions and conclusions based on our statements and see if everything makes sense or if we end up with more of a spaghetti logic mess. So our first assumption is that Liv is a hacker. That doesn't seem to contradict anything in the statements or down here. So it looks like that's good. And then our second statement is that Mick is a hero. That makes sense with this first statement, as we talked about earlier. And Mick says, I'm a hero. So if Mick tells the truth and says that he's a hero, and Mick says he's a hero up here, then he's saying the same thing everywhere, no contradictions. And it looks like we have the answer to our puzzle, that Liv is a hacker and Mick is a hero. Now let's get into our second example. So also on this website, there are only two kinds of people, hackers and heroes, where hackers always lie and heroes always tell the truth. And you meet two people, Beck and Cam. Beck says, we're both heroes, where Cam says, no, we're opposites, and I'm the hero. So let's try to figure out who is who. First, by pulling out our statements. Beck's statement is that we're both heroes, meaning Beck and Cam are both heroes. And Cam's statement is, no, we're opposites, and I am the hero. So there are two parts to Cam's statements. We'll use that just a bit later. So now let's make an assumption and try to work this puzzle using our assumption. I'm going to assume that Beck is a hero, that Beck tells the truth. And so if Beck tells the truth, then her statement up here must be true. And where Beck says, we're both heroes, if that's true, then Beck and Cam must be heroes, which means Cam is also a hero, and Cam tells the truth. Now let's look at Cam's statement. Cam says, no, we're opposites, and I am the hero. So if they're both telling the truth, and the things that they say are opposite, Beck says we're both heroes, and Cam says no, we're opposites. They can't both be telling the truth, right? Somebody's lying, which means that since we kind of hit this spaghetti mess of like, wait, they're both telling the truth, but they're saying opposite things, then our assumption was probably wrong. That's our clue there. So we're going to not assume that Beck is a hero. Instead, let's try to assume that Beck is a hacker, that Beck tells lies only. And so let's try to work through our puzzle again using that assumption. So if Beck says, we're both heroes, and that's a lie, then what's the opposite of we're both heroes? The opposite must be true. Well, then the opposite would be that at least one of them is a hacker, right? And so if Beck is a hacker and Beck tells lies, then this is a lie, and at least one of them has to be a hacker. Well, that one is Beck, right? So we're good there. But that doesn't tell us anything about Cam. All it says is that Cam might be a hero or a hacker. So then Cam is a hero or a hacker. Cam says we're opposites and I am the hero. So I'm going to try assuming that Cam is a hero, that Cam tells the truth. And so if Cam tells the truth, then they are opposites. And so what's the opposite of Beck, the hacker? The hero. So Cam must be the hero. And if Cam is telling the truth, then his statement about opposites makes sense. And where he says, I am the hero, that's the same as what we have down here. Cam is a hero. So it looks like with these assumptions that everything checks out. And so our final answer for this puzzle is that Beck is a hacker and Cam is a hero. Thank you so much for watching our video today. There are a couple of action items that you can do if you really enjoyed this kind of puzzle or this discussion about cybersecurity. You can share this video with a friend. You can start a conversation with someone else about cybersecurity, and maybe you can share about some of the things that you learned today. You can also come to our Bits and Bytes live section next Wednesday. We'll be doing more in the realm of cybersecurity and having another discussion about phishing emails. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys